It's so interesting to see the different devices that people have worked with today, the many different computers and iPads, and I think we're ending here on a futuristic note here with a small and very smart device. Jan, thank you so much for being here. I have a very short bio, but I think it's also special because you're probably the person speaking today here who knew Silke the longest. And so I think your adult lives sort of began more or less together, and I think it will be a very special occasion, and I'm very grateful to be able to hear what you have to say about Silke's work and how we can think of it without her being present. Jan Verwoert writes about art. He teaches at the Piet Zwart Institute in Rotterdam and at the Art Academy in Oslo. And he now lives in West Berlin. Welcome, Jan. Thank you.
Hey, thank you for the invitation. Thank you for staying for the entire day, and thank you to all the presenters before. I'm going to do and try my best to also respond to the presentations before, which I thought were really deep and to the point. I'm going to talk about the moon. I'm going to talk in the key of the moon, in the signature of the moon, in the mode of the moon. And I'm going to do so in 3 steps. First, I'm going to talk about modes. And then I'm going to talk about mood. At first, the mode I want to talk about is the mode that you could call homage, for better or worse, which means talking through work, through someone's work to that person. Something that Silke has done so many times, talking to other artists' work to these artists, and which I guess in many, many ways today we have also done, talking through Silke's work to her. I'm afraid it's going to be a little bit personal, parts of it. Yes, as you were saying, like we probably would have known each other 32 years by now. We studied together and joined the whole dance that we're part of now together, so there are some memories involved, but I want to do it in the key of the homage, pointing to the fact that I find Silke's work speaks so strongly because she has developed her practice as one of many, many homages. The second part is going to also be in the modal key, talking about, while we're in the city of Abi Warburg, how certain motifs in the work, like the moon that someone like Warburg would probably have called a dynamogram, is a motif that moves. It's not just something that represents, it's something that affects, that sends energy out, that has a kinetic dimension to it, and that it realizes, it makes the work, and that realizes that energy in many different modes. So I'm going to run through a couple of examples, how I feel the moon connects, the moon reaches out, the moon touches. And then I'm going to end on a very short reflection on moods, how also in response to the space next door, how beyond and before what a work references, it sets the tune, it sets the key, it sets the mood, it tunes, es stimmt den Raum, it tunes the moon, the space to a certain key. So modes of homage, modes of efficacy, of reaching out and touching, and then moods of retuning the space. Jutta, you guys ended on talking about the magic of the work, and I guess Silke and I, we were teaching a lot together, also in Banff, where we looked at magic and landscape, and I feel part of understanding how something connects and how you talk through the work to someone is that it reaches out beyond the living towards what we consider the dead, that it talks back and invokes spirits that may or may not be with us. So I do find it almost appropriate to assume that we're actually talking to Silke today in certain ways. So I will take the liberty to sometimes address her as the presence that we may feel in the space without certainty. When Silke sent me that painting of, or like that watercolor of the moon, Thomas, what you were saying, it's one of those moments when a gift reminds you of a debt that you don't know how to settle, and that's so unsettling about speaking back to someone when you don't quite know what the appropriate words would be, as you beautifully put it, because they are, particularly when people have moved you in very decisive ways, that leaves you with a commitment that might register as a debt. So when I received that painting for like a while, I couldn't say anything, couldn't do anything, despite the fact that I was thinking of her every day. And then sometimes when you don't know how to appropriately react, you do the most stupid thing imaginable. So I just sent her a voice message with a stupid song. And I'm not gonna be able, Silke, to settle this thing properly. Maybe that's also not the point, but maybe a song that I could have sent in the spirit of homages is one jazz classic that I recently tried to teach myself. And don't worry, like Silke, I know that you were usually both annoyed and entertained when I would pick up the guitar. So in the spirits of annoyance and entertainment, let me just try this one quick phrase of a tune that I hope is appropriately titled. Somewhere there's music, how near, how far. Somewhere there's heaven, that's where you are. The darkest night would shine if you would come to me soon. Until you will, my star, until you will, how still my heart, how high the moon. Yeah. I mean, serenading Silke is something that I have probably done quite a bit in my life, and that I felt compelled to do by several experiences in my life that I want to go into a little bit later. But speaking back to the work, singing to the work, is part of responding to a certain history, but it maybe also comes from a place of experience. We have been talking a lot about today. Simon, you were talking about the precision in terms of how representations are being invoked and controlled down to the moment of documentation. And Sabat, you were talking about how references are being rehearsed and brought into the work. So we've been talking about histories of representation, which I think is all true, and that's why the work excels in its precision. But I sometimes feel like it's also important to keep the place of experience in there, not as a secret place of inspiration, but a place from which the work also speaks and comes back to, and which, for instance, is the place of nature. I'm really not an outdoor type, but Silke chased me out for hiking in the Rocky Mountains. Come on, boy, we gotta go. During painting workshops that we're teaching together at the Banff Arts Center, and where the experience of nature, beyond and before its representation, was something that the work is also, I guess, coming from. Going out there, be it Fogo Islands, be it the Rocky Mountains, maybe not as a place of authenticating the work, not nature as something that adds extra validity to the work, but as an experience that the work departs from and that the work also seeks. We were hiking up these mountains, drawing on top, and it always felt that this is an experience of teaching, Thomas, as you were saying, like having an experience together, but always also being in the face of nature or like in these mountains, these islands that are talking back and talking through the work, not as a referent, not something that's represented, but something that puts you in a certain mood, into a certain spirit, before you then hop over to the print workshop and do, I don't know, 42 prints. Exactly. From that, one of the last times we met was on Gotland, where Silke was having a residency at the Bergman archives there, and for some strange reason, in the beginning of the year, where I was blissfully ignorant of the fact that the exhibition would actually happen, I kept my iPad library kept sending me that image consistently every single day, as if, Silke, you were reaching out and saying, come on, guy, dude, move, look out what's happening, you're missing something here. So in terms of the ominous that I also want to talk about later a little bit, it seemed that images are signs, they speak from a place, they carry a certain mood, they might carry a kind of message between worlds, if you will. Speaking back to images, I have to confess, I wouldn't be speaking, I wouldn't be writing if Silke hadn't pushed me to, Thomas, much as you said. We had one experience together when we were studying in one of the first year. I was still painting, and standing in front of us painting and speaking back to my own painting, going Nietzsche, 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 and Silke was going like, listen, man, what you're saying is interesting, but first of all, it has nothing to do with the painting. Secondly, it's perfectly all right because the painting is horrible. It seems to me that what you actually desire is philosophy. Why don't you go and freaking study it? I read in Hannah Arendt's Human Condition, there is this moment when she talks about politics as that moment where you come together with people who see the daimon, the Juno or genie that's walking behind you, that's informing all of your acts, the demon of your desire, which you will never see, but which is pretty much the first thing that everybody else sees. But it takes a certain kind of frankness, honesty, and boldness to put someone on the spot and say, don't stop messing around. I think that's what you want. Why don't you do it? And I'm infinitely grateful to you, Silke. I'm infinitely grateful to her for just putting me on that spot in that moment, which had a practical effect because the first text I ever wrote was actually in response to one of her first exhibitions in an apartment that Bernd Krauss and Daniel Pies organized, in which she presented a stack of pastel-colored painted newspapers, like monochromes, stacked on top of each other as a material pile of colored plates. Couldn't find that text again, for the love of God, but it's sometimes when people prompt you into action, when they read your desire. I think, Thomas, you spoke about it beautifully, and I can affirm the fact that I so respect Silke for not holding back in moments when she read that desire and fed it back, mirrored it back to people in sometimes also unsettling and uncomfortable ways, because sometimes that's the last thing you're prepared for. But anyway, so I left for London, and so did she, where then I was studying philosophy, running around the city. She had a studio at Cubit Galleries in the room where the fuse boxes were, where she started painting, and at the end of the day I would always offload all my philosophy ideas in the studio, and she would show me what she painted, and then we would go to the openings together. Two experiences that we made, which I want to bring up. I don't know, they were certainly formative for me. I don't know, Silke, if they were formative for you too. One was the experience of going to see an Elizabeth Peyton show that Cabinet Gallery had hosted, and we're talking probably in 1994, in the back room of a pub. And I don't know if it was exactly the little drawing that you see down there, but it was pencil drawings of Kurt Cobain by Elizabeth Peyton. And at the time, I really felt, oh my God, is this actually possible? That you can voice your desire for the fantasy stored in an image in such a way that the image answers to your fantasy, that the image mirrors it back. I don't know, it blew me away as thinking that this is actually possible, there is no prohibition against seeing an image answer, speak back to your desire, as I had thought before. Another pub backroom story was when we went to a concert of Minty, Lee Bowery's band, after Lee Bowery's death, in the backroom of a pub which I think was called the Water Rats, which was close to King's Cross. And in terms of like that moment when the image stops being cold but actually starts speaking back to you, there was a decisive moment when two performers on stage started live piercing each other's lips. And first it seemed like, oh, that is just, they probably have holes already in their body, and it felt like this is just a representation, until I think we both at the same point saw the blood running down the chin of one of the performers. And I remember that moment, Silke, when we looked at each other and realized that we're both going to faint. You know, that moment when vision breaks down and you feel these circles are starting in front of your eyes. And I know that Silke bolted to the toilets and I ran out, so she fainted in the toilets and I fainted on the pavement in front of the Water Rats. I don't know why I connect these two experiences, but it felt there is a moment before you were talking about the breakdown of the fourth wall, when something of your fear, something of your desire is hosted by the image and given back to you in a truly unsettling way. Which to me ran very much counter to like stuff I'd studied before, for instance Douglas Crimm's text on his pictures exhibition, where he's talking about Sherry Levine and Troy Browntuch, Richard Prince and that generation, he says, in relation how desire is mirrored by the picture, every operation to which Browntuch subjects these pictures represents the duration of a fascinated, perplexed gaze whose desire is that they disclose their secrets, but the result is only to make the picture all the more picture-like, to fix forever in an elegant object our distance from the history that produced these images. That distance is all that these pictures signify. I can't deny that in their elegance, and I think one of the participants in the previous section was also saying that the paintings next door make you fall silent. So there is no direct mirroring back. There is also some of the elegant distance towards the history that these pictures fix in place. But I do believe that contrary to the pictures generation, Silke, what you're doing is in a way you are hosting desire in the picture. You're not just deflecting it back to the desiring subject that glides down on the surface of things. It's not like there's too much traction in the image, but I feel like the desire that you throw at the picture is given a home in the picture. They're not cold mirrors, even though, as you were saying in the debate before, there is a mirroring moment. Part of the desire that you throw in is probably also your mirror image coming back. But I feel like with these scenes of people, desire has a home in these pictures. There is a city of desire, there is a place of desire where desire lives in history, and this is not a post-historical work. This is history coming back. The demons and ghosts of history are actually dancing around you. They are in the house. The whole house is haunted by the histories of modernism, and it's not just, you're not locked out from it. That's what I'm trying to say. I connect that with the experience of seeing Minty and Elizabeth Peyton. I don't know, Silke, if that was similarly a turning moment for you, but I feel that this is part of a generational shift from a cold image that as Grimm correctly describes, leaves your desire mirrored, but on the outside in an almost fetishistic relationship, to an image that invites desire, reflects desire, but also houses desire, gives a home to it. Talking about the 50-foot Queenie and PJ Harvey as a performer at the time, who was, I think, also building a character that was living desire and reflecting desire and joking about her own desire to be 50-foot Queenie. Was it 60 foot? Could be 70. I remember Mary Heilman catalog that was entitled, I think, want to be someone or being someone. So the desire to actually live the life of the arts, to be 50, 60, 70-foot Queenie, to be someone, to enter that symbolic space and find a home in that space. Some of the first paintings that Silke was painting in the, and sorry for showing it, maybe I should have kept it in my own locker, in the Cubit fuse box room on plasterboard were these P.J. Harvey paintings that you see there. P.J. Harvey winking back at the viewer, acknowledging the gaze of desire and winking back to it. Followed then by the first series of paintings about LA and Las Vegas as a city that is built on visual desire and literally gives a home and a house to visual desire. I remember conversations with Silke where you were saying that nature is not a given there. Also, that nature in LA and Las Vegas is artificial because there's not enough water. So all of these plants are actually pictures. All of these plants are actual watercolors, if you will. It's a city that paints its own makeup. So what passes for nature there is actually a form of painting, if you will. It's a representation that to some extent mirrors the desire of the spa city that LA initially was hoped to be. And I've always found it so moving that from painting these paintings, reflecting the desire for a city of desire, a city of painting, a painted city, Silke would then move there and teach painting. Yeah. I always found it funny, like Paulina Orlovska once said in a conversation, you know, I just can't paint men. I'm not going to paint any man. I just suck at painting men. I'm not going to do it. And sorry, Silke, I remember a conversation where you were saying, you know, like faces are just not my thing. I'm just going to not do faces. So on the one hand, as you were saying, the empty face is almost like the witch that you see in Maya Duren's Meshes of the Afternoon is an empty mirror face where the place that houses desire is exactly the moment when you project your own face into that moment of absence. At the same time, speaking about the humor of the work and the materiality and materialism of it, I still always, when I think about artistic decisions, I so strongly appreciate moments when someone says, you know, I just can't do faces. It's not my thing, and then resolve to never paint a face again. Now switching into the key, into the mode, into the fashion of homage. Homage as a key in which you inhabit your own desire for a picture, where you become the painter that you desire to be by speaking through their work. One thing I always tell students, talking back to again about educational politics, when it comes to the strange, it seems, law that every art student must only talk from their own place about their own work, as if we are perpetually behind the wall and defending and justifying our work. Something that Silke so beautifully did in her work, but also in her talks, was actually inhabit other people's work. For instance, Marianne North, a Victorian botanist painter. So whenever instead of saying, you know, I relate to nature in painting and painting in nature, she would invoke someone like Marianne North and just talk about Marianne North and give very, very insightful comments about someone else's work that would be as insightful about Marianne North as about her own work. So like in speaking through the work of others, back to the work of others, she would actually also be revealing a lot about her own desire. No, desire housed in another artist's work, but addressed and also shared in the key of speaking back to another painter like Marianne North in paintings, but also in talks about her. In the same way that, for instance, speaking through Goncharova Natalia Goncharova, in her work, brought in such a strong energy that on the one hand you could associate with the force of LA as a city where cinematic pictures talk in big formats, but where the desire to be on stage is also spoken through a stage crafting artist like Natalia Goncharova, who produced costumes and backdrops for the Ballet Russe, among other things. Speaking about that theatrical moment, Nancy Hamilton, who was one of the co-writers of How High the Moon, is quoted as saying, if you want to be in the play, you got to write one. So you could paraphrase that, if you want to be on stage, you got to paint yourself one, if you will. In the same way that speaking through Florine Stettheimer, to me, always seemed like a paraphrase of your way of understanding the agency of an artist in social life. We talked a lot about backstage and on stage before. What I so deeply love about that painting that is a homage to Florine Stettheimer is that it's also a paraphrase, if you will, of how Silke herself conducted social life as an art form, hosting as an art form. Apparently Florine Stettheimer had her living quarters and her hosting quarters of her apartment, I know all of that from Silke, obviously, separated by a cellophane curtain. And the same cellophane curtain that she then later used with Gertrude Stein when they did 9 Saints in 9 Acts, where she did the stage displays. So where the difference between private and public, hosting and painting, is just a very, very fine membrane that in itself is actually, in Silke's painting, a metaphor for the canvas, if you will. The canvas is the skin between private and public life, and the canvas, also in Florine Stettheimer's paintings, as you see above, the canvas literally becomes the space of desire. As Florine Stettheimer was hosting the avant-garde of the time, there is this really funny painting where you have a bored Picabia and Duchamp trying to be polite, commenting on her painting, while in the backdrop you see Florine Stettheimer herself as a nude watching over everybody who's in the space, where it's literally the painting doing the hosting and the canvas is the space of desire where the guests assemble. I always had that feeling, Silke, that in hosting, especially, I only got to experience it in London, really, bringing everybody over, cooking, getting everybody to talk. It seemed like this kind of social dynamic that the paintings give a space to was literally also the space of the apartment in which we got together, and where, for instance, I then stumbled over the Florine Stettheimer catalog, literally sitting under a huge Peter Doig painting from whom Tom Abts and Silke Otto-Knapp were renting their apartments. And it was one of these Friday 13th paintings that's probably by now like 10 times the price of the house itself, but it was chilling there on the wall, and you would hardly look at it, but it was kind of watching over you. And I feel that is an experience I made there, which I see with a lot of paintings by Silke, that while you're looking at them, they're also kind of watching over you. You could also just chill and have a chat, and they would still be holding that space open in which the conversation is happening. I think that's the hosting that the canvas can do, and also the canvas as a membrane between backstage and on stage, as something where the transition from private to public becomes porous and quite fluid. As a spirit celebrated, I think, by the work in its many different phases. Speaking through work, giving a space for conversation by becoming an actual salon host would lead you to acknowledging, Silke, that you were more than just the managing editor of After All when After All began. In the spirit of frank talk, I guess this is being transmitted, but it was always so hilarious to see how scared Charles Eschi and Mark Lewis, Silke, were of you. Namely that you were in the beginning the only person who told them, listen, this is not going to be just a curatorial platform. After all, it's a magazine about art, so we should have some freaking artists in it, not just readily curatable subjects. And for a while, I think Silke held the fort after all as a huge influence, actually making that art magazine. I honestly think that should be said. She was an amazing editor, holding the space of conversation open in the living room, in the space of painting, and actually also in that art magazine. Obviously, I profited from it because she got me in there as a writer all the time. Anyway, living the space of the painting, Silke, the moment we kind of said goodbye was a very Florine Stadtheimer moment. In the summer before you died, I was visiting in LA. I was so nervous that I lost my passport on the way and talked my way into the States without a passport, and then had to stay longer waiting for my passport, where we're hanging out in the garden in the summer. And I have to say, one of my 10 rules in my life have always been Silke nicht nerven. Don't get on Silke's nerve. I'm a single child, I'm super self-conscious, so staying with Silke, being hosted by her, was a boot camp in stopping to be self-conscious. It usually meant that when you get up in the morning, you hear the sounds upstairs, and you have to make sure that you're in the kitchen before you, Silke, and look like you're doing something, that you have a purpose in life, like putting away some dishes or running out to get some croissants or something like that. Never be caught self-conscious. And in that moment, in the summer, oh God, I was so self-conscious in the garden. Silke, you were lying there in a day robe that Sharon Lockhart had given to you, like very Florine Stadtheimer moment, this floral robe lying on a chaiselon and bossing me around to water the cactus in the bold way that Thomas, you just very politely went around. She's like, Jan, mehr Wasser. You've never, das wird doch nichts. So in my most self-conscious, awkward ways, I was like, okay, running around in the garden, desperately trying to water all the cactuses. So, and then, yeah, it really felt like a Florine Stadtheimer moment when, as a self-conscious guy, you jump around in the garden and then leave with the most stupid possible words. I think I knew that saying goodbye would be ridiculous, so I just said, see you later. Yeah. Homage as a mode of opening up the space of desire, of hosting desire in an image, of giving a space where desire communicates in ever so many forms, where the painting becomes a salon, where an art magazine opens up, and where you are also disconnected from the simple representational duty of only just having to speak in your own name. I guess that's what I wanted to say. Coming to the second part, speaking about, Silke, your use of motifs and how the canvas, beyond and before becoming a representational screen, becomes an energetic zone, a zone where a certain dynamogram, like for instance the moon, radiates a certain energy and makes certain connections. One traditional way in which the power of the sign to connect is thought of in mystical traditions is the idea, as you said, of a premonition, of an omen. No, I saw the sign and it opened up my heart. Something that you see that talks to you. You don't know what it means, but you know that it means. It's something that changes your life, that talks to you, that tells you that something fateful is about to happen. And I think the role of the moon, in so far as through the moon, in the key of the moon, Silke is having a conversation with Edvard Munch, very often turns the mode of the moon towards the ominous. In German, I love this word Vorzeichen, premonition. It's ein Zeichen vor den Zeichen, something that cues you in, tunes you into a certain key in which you're going to receive meaning, but it's not yet meaning, it's einfach ein Vorzeichen. Es stellt dich auf etwas ein. The funny thing though, even though the premonition, the ominous, the strange signature of some fateful occurrence that the moon carries in the mode of the ominous also actually crosses over into the mode of the funny. When you think about it, also the moment that Edvard Munch uses the moon and its reflection in the water at some point almost like a thumbnail, like a ridiculous little shorthand for the fateful. It's reduced to such a simple sign-like form. They go zack, a simple move that almost mocks the idea that should signify, almost like René Daniel's bow tie or something like that. No, it's like, I can't believe that you actually think that this is a symbol. It's a bow tie after all. In the same way that this kind of strange fingerprint of God on the sea, especially in Munch's prints, becomes this readily quotable material thing. Oh, let's do another moon. Wer nichts weiß, malt einen Kreis. Yeah? And what I love about that use, Silke, that you're making of the moon in the mode of the ominous, then it's the most deeply scary, and at the same time it's a painter's joke at the same time. It's a painter's joke that you share with Edvard Munch about how simple it is to turn a moon into a signature. On the ominous side, I have to say, Silke, on the day that you died, there was a full moon, and I was out in a Norwegian forest picking mushrooms, and when we came back, the chimney had closed and all the smoke had actually gone into the house, and so for days everything was smelling of smoke, and it's freaking ominous, if you will. Like, I think omens are a thing, they are a riddle, you know that something is talking to you. Unclear what it says, but that's because it's so fateful. It's the shorthand of fate. I find it so courageous to turn that omen into a painter's joke at the same time. Exactly, yeah. Talking about backstage and front of house, or I should also say backline and front of house, or backdrop and front of house. I think something that, Silke, you do when you speak in the key of Natalia Goncharova is you're activating a particular power of the backdrop. The great thing about Goncharova, and by the same token, I believe the work that we have next door, is that the backdrop is such a strange thing. No, the backdrop is supposed to carry performance forward. The backdrop is all about energizing the space in front of it, as you were feeling in the session before, when yes, the space in front of the painting gets activized. That's why there's a flatness. The backdrop is pushing everything to the front. At the same time, the cheeky thing that Goncharova is doing is, and Silke by the same token, is to have an element in the backdrop that carries everything to the front while it cuts through the mix. I was looking, Silke, for one of your paintings, and for the love of God, I couldn't find it. There is one painting where the moon actually becomes a kick drum, where there's a band playing and the bass drum is that round. And in terms of, backdrops that carry everything and cut through, I've been thinking about kick drums and the history of famous kick drums. Michaela, looking at you, but the history, for instance, of the 909 kick drum, which is an electronic bass drum that you find in most tech. It's a mainstay of techno and house tracks, because that kick drum has the strange backdrop quality that it will carry everything to the front. It's a complete support. At the same time, it will always cut through the mix and hit you where you need to be moved. So in terms of, if we move from backstage to onstage to backdrop and front of house and speak about the power of a painting to address, to move you, to energize you, maybe the moon as a motif, like a good kick drum, the moon is carrying energy into the space in front of the painting while it always cuts through as a motif. And that is so mind-boggling, how something can be in the back and push everything to the front while itself, as we say, cuts through the mix and hits you directly. Normally we think about, let's say, a confrontative spirit and the boldness as just something saying, hey, here I am, deal with me. And I remember a conversation that we had in the garden with Frances Stark, who is an amazing joke teller, and she was imitating a raccoon that she found in her garage in terms of this sort of self-assertiveness. Hey, California raccoon, ready for a fight, engaging the audience. That's one way of being bold, but I find like a particular way of being bold that, Silke, your paintings and that Goncharova's work share is that it pushes to the front while it holds the space in the back. And I think that's a very unique quality that you also in music know from a rhythm section. No, you carry the whole thing, you move the whole thing forward while you hold the space where the audience can then move or the solo performer will exist. Speaking about electric lights, in the history of modernity, I feel like the moment that the moon becomes a light bulb, we're actually talking about that which electrifies modernity, a space where whatever is seen by virtue of being seen in electric light gets a certain quality. And I can't help thinking about the parallel between Silke's electric light bulbs and Manet's last painting, where he paints a modern bar full of mirrors with these electric lights that, again, like a painting joke, if you will, are these kind of strange light drops, these lacuna of light that inside they're not even attached to the ceiling. They're somehow a white, a negative spot in the painting that's at the same time, the entire painting disappears into a white hole, which is that unattached light ball. And it's even funnier, I don't know if you see it in the back, on top of that light ball, there are two little green feet on a trapeze, which I guess is Manet's joke about the place of the artist. Everybody's looking for something to look at, so it's a space of desire where desire is just randomly mirrored by all these kind of glass objects, but just over the place where all the light that illuminates that space of desire and representation comes from. There's little Mrs. or Mr. Greenfoot hovering in the space of performance over the spot where the painting comes from and collapses, if you will. Speaking about how high the moon, the space of electrified New York in the 1920s, if I ever had a minute to do proper research and go into a time journey like Silke you did in so many of the works, something that I would currently really, really be curious about is how in that electrified space of New York in the 20s, queer Dada meets Harlem Renaissance, and how a song like How High the Moon, written by a lesbian icon like Nancy Hamilton, then comes to be performed by Ella Fitzgerald and then becomes the bob hat, the chord changes that Charlie Parker turns into ornithology. So how one song, it doesn't connect the scenes, but one song has the power to certain magnetize a certain kind of focus, a certain electricity, and allows different performers to open up their space of desire that art history still disconnects as Dada New York and Harlem Renaissance, when maybe these people might have been in the same electrified space together, across which How High the Moon then traveled. Coming to the closing lines of that second part, one conversation about the desire for light or desire in the light, and desire to inhabit the poses that appear in the light, which I always thought were mutually formative, Silke, if I may say so, was the conversation between Hilary Lloyd and Silke Otto-Knapp, and also Janice Kerbel, and I can't really go into this. That's down there. There's an exhibition that Sören Grammel, with whom we also studied together, did at the Kunstverein in Cologne, and up there's a show that Stefan Kalmar, with whom we also studied together, did at the Artist Space in New York, where I feel at some moment Hillary started with the poses. I'm going to get to that in a second. The power of the pose reflecting the gaze, and then eventually started turning towards that point of light where the screen reflects its own energy, where the light that shines on something to render it visible in itself. The desire for visibility culminates in a point of light that travels across the screen, as in some of the later works that Hillary was doing in the past years after having been friends, Silke, with you for many, many years. So from the screen art to the painting, I feel that there's an intense dialogue. And Sabet, what you were talking about, the psychoanalytic twist, I have to say, like, when we were in London together, I was pumping my head with Lacan, and at the time there was a lot of seminars were about this anamorphotic point where the field of visual representation breaks down and emerges from the same point that Lacan calls the point of light, where the visible world suddenly is condensed in one little reflection that makes you feel like something is looking back at you. This is almost like in a bathtub, der Ablauf, whatever that's in English, where the water drops out, but in the same time as if you imagine a bathtub where the water comes out and flows out away in the same spot, like a strange lacuna, a strange rip in the fabric of representation from which the visible emerges but also disappears. And I can't help thinking about Silke's moon in that sense. This is the moment where the painting flows out from, but also flows out of. With Hillary, I have a similar sense with these kind of strange reflections that speak about what a screen is as a device for making things visible, from which visibility emerges, but also in which visibility disappears. That sounds very cryptic, I'm sorry. Another thing that talking about people who teach you something, a lesson that I got from Hillary, which I always understood as a lesson learned maybe together with Silke, with you, if I may say so, that I remember when Silke got me to write about Hillary through After All, and I hung out with Hillary for the first time, and I was going into all kinds of sociological interpretation and the body language, doesn't it represents gender, class, and all of these things. And Hillary was going, yeah, it does all of that, but before the pose signifies, that's my words now, the pose has a particular power to break into things. These are my words. She was just saying, Jan, before you strangle me with sociology, go boy, watch some Maya Deren. Which, whatever Silke tells me, I do. Whatever her friends told me, I also did. Looking at Maya Deren, all of these are works by Hillary Lloyd on the one hand, mixed with works by Maya Deren, like the Meditation on Violence and The Witch's Cradle, where the fascination that erupts from the pose is something that keeps you looking. No, a pose is not just something that you look at. It's a pose that magnetizes you. The pose magnetizes your eyes. It's what breaks through the fourth wall and even creates the occasion for looking back at something. And I remember Hillary, after we had that conversation, dragged me to the back door of a Foot Locker where we had a sandwich and watched all the guys inside posing and having going almost like beyond the duty of selling the product, having a lot of fun, putting out a lot of energy that I think also Hillary was looking for in terms of, let's say, the electricity of a city, that you throw a pose for no one, and it was really freaking gorgeous. And I think I learned a lot about the pose, what the pose does as something before and beyond signification that puts out the energy into space for things even to signify, as a liminal thing, if you will. And I can't help thinking that there has been a conversation between Hillary Lloyd and Silke, between you, about the pose as something that carries the sign forward, that creates visuality, that prompts the look, if you will. To end on a last reflection, on the one hand, what I wanted to say is that, yes, the enormous precision that is in the work how references are being invoked, how histories are being brought into play in a canonical or non-canonical way as in the form of a living archive, a living embodied archive. All of that, absolutely. I just think before and beyond representation and signification, there are these moments where the work is being driven by certain motifs that have a certain power beyond and before representation, be that the moon as an ominous sign, be that the moon that kicks the thing forward like a good kick drum, or the pose that in a way opens up a space of visuality that it pushes while being exposed to it. No, it's an enormous strength, while obviously it's also a moment of exposure. Stepping forward into visibility, you expose yourself, you become vulnerable. At the same time, I think someone who really knows the power of gesture and the pose knows that while you become visible, you really create a space. You create the space of attention that emerges from your body and is swallowed up by your body again. I think on the one hand, yes, the pose is vulnerable to the gaze of others, but it also actually pumps energy in the field of visuality that would otherwise not exist. And I'm partially paraphrasing Kaya Silverman on The Threshold of the Visible World here, where she makes a similar claim about the power of the pose, not just to be exposed, but to actually format a space of attention to hold the gaze, which leads us that was one thought I still wanted to add about these strange moments when the moon, on the one hand, is that which puts the light in the picture, but in a psychoanalytic way, Sabet, if I could follow you up on that, is also the moment when there's simply a stain in the picture around which representation then collapses, especially with watercolors. I do think that arriving at the moon came from ever so many water stains, where that is really something that on the end, Silke, I thought you were perfect in controlling. I remember a scene in a studio in LA when, Silke, you were moving a painting around like this and joking, da ist ja wie Abwasch machen, it's like doing dishes, yeah? Where it's really a moment of control, a material control over shifting the pigments and the water around. Well, beyond and before control, there is always a moment when the moon still remains that water stain that shows that shows the materiality of representation, and that's the point around which it fades and breaks down. Many people have argued that the point of trauma or a point of loss is precisely the moment where the stain enters the picture. The loss of a loved person, the moment when you cannot signify, where the depth, as you've said, Thomas, stays open. And as I was saying with Munch, where the ominous becomes deeply existential, at the same time almost a joke, I feel like with the moon being both a stain, a material stain on the image, to me it signifies enormous loss. Something that stains the work, and that already maybe in Silke's, in your painting, was also already signifying or like pointing to a certain loss, if you will. At the same time, it is still, in the moment, it becomes like a watermark, like a signature that is repeated as the painter's thumbprint. It also becomes something very material that you joke about, like doing the dishes, which is a boldness I enormously respect. About speaking about loss, speaking about trauma, speaking about the breakdown of the image as the emergence of the image, while at the same time turning it into a thumbprint, a signature. Ending on the idea of atmosphere, which is not an idea, it's a phenomenon, what we describe as mood. That is an open and unfinishable conversation. I remember once talking, Silke, with you in the Camden Arts Center exhibition about atmosphere and the power and beauty of atmosphere, because that lies in the fact that you can never put your finger on it. Atmosphere is everywhere. A blue Monday is blue throughout. It's not in any detail. it's exactly what I would argue an all-over painting strives for. By being monochrome, everything gets kind of silverish, gets kind of dark, gets kind of light. You can't put your finger on it. It's an overall effect. It's an overall wash, if you will, in the same way that your courageous curatorial joint decision of coloring everything yellow puts one wash over the entire space. Again, we're talking about something that is before and beyond representation, as something that colors everything that you will see. There's a passage in Sein und Zeit, Being and Time, where Heidegger says, Stimmung ist ein Existenzial, Dasein ist gestimmt. Mood is an existential quality. Being is in a certain mood. Always, you find being in a certain mood. Everything is tuned to a certain key. I remember, Silke, when I was talking to you about that last time, she gave me this look, I was like, you politely expressed it of like, I'm not certain. In German, I remember the expression, ja, ich weiß nicht, which is shorthand for young men you might be talking out of your ass. But obviously something like atmosphere and mood is heavily associated with a certain romantic tradition that one might want to break away from, atmosphere as something that sanctifies, that transubstantiates, that makes something holy, that elevates something. But maybe that's not the atmosphere I want to touch on here. It's more like, I guess, that moment where landscape painting, Sam, you were talking about that, where landscape painting turns into space making, turns into mood setting, where you literally tune a space towards putting people into a certain state of awareness or receptivity, if you will. You never just tune the space, you also tune people to a certain frequency. Unfortunately, very often people only talk about it in terms of manipulation. That, you set the mood when you turn down the lights or something like that, as if it was a simple mechanical feat to do that. I don't think it is, definitely not in the painting, Silke, that you were doing, and also not necessarily in terms of what you were doing here in the space, because just switching everything to yellow is not a careful manipulation. It's just a wash-over filter that also exposes itself in what it is. So for me, that still remains an open question mark. On the one hand, I can speak about motifs pushing forward. I can talk about the pose, creating a certain space, configuring attention. But one thing about the magic of the work is how you tune an entire surface by allowing for the water, moving away from the brushes to the water, to go everywhere. So at the end, you never just paint a form, Silke, but you paint the entire canvas. And as such, the entire canvas, in this all-over effect, opens up a specific space that is always already tuned to a certain key, sometimes of joy and humor, and sometimes to the key of something deeply existential and ominous in the description that I've been giving. And I think maybe that's what I wanted to say. Yeah.
Speaker, thank you, Jan. Are there any questions? Otherwise, I maybe would start, because I'm sort of interested in this idea of sort of the sign, which is also a body, but which then somehow collapses back into the sign, or somehow they're not resolved in a way in those paintings. Abstraction, which is a figure, which is the moon, but then we know from this particular painting that it is just a circle, like something round on a stage that Kurt would have built or had built if it had ever been produced in reality.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for me, but maybe I'm now also carrying my desire into the image. And as we were teaching in Banff together, one thing at the time I was really obsessed by is to understand the difference between mimesis and representation. The sense that what we learn as modern representation, that this signifies that a work is a sign that represents and points towards something else, is definitely one level of modern representational art practices. But underlying the power of art to even connect, there is something that is mimetic, where the sign doesn't signify, where the sign connects in an ominous way. Also zodiac signs, we're both Gemini, we talk. There's some that the point is like signs channel energies, they become energy hubs. That's a mimetic way of thinking. And mimetic is on the one hand magic, but mimetic is also the form of the mother of all comedy. If I imitate you, it's clear that I'm not you, but if I do it well, it would be so ridiculous that I become that thing. I'm not explaining that well. There is something about the mimetic game, also puppet playing, when you put out a thing and gesture with it, and on the one hand, if you do it well, that connects, but it can always flip back to just being a thing. I think the main course director in Banff, she would always have this postcard, so I would love to explain, but unfortunately I'm out of puppets. That sense of when that which can mimetically channel can in the next moment also just become a thing, like a doll or a prop that you put up and play with. And I find that super fascinating. And I find a lot of powerful art that acknowledges the mimetic dimension. On the one hand, allows for the mimetic signature to become active and push out a certain amount of energy, and the next moment just become that thing, that puppet that you drop, or that circle that's on stage. And it could be anything, but then as a prop it suddenly comes into effect.
If you were to speak about the last moon, the youngest moon on the painted triptych on the screen, there's something about the way in which those paintings have a different relationship to kind of the atmosphere of the exhibition space, or the kind of way they stand and interact with audience. Could you maybe say something to that, to the effects of that particular moon?
You mean the paintings becoming actual backdrops or standing on their own?
Yeah, and the frontality of that moon also sort of, and the exhaustion of something going on maybe in the way that moon is drawn so lightly, and what that has to do with maybe the pictorial devices changing in those last paintings, moving off the wall, becoming somehow flatter and more in real space.
Absolutely, yeah. It's a strange push and pull. No, on the one hand, you have also some of the works in the exhibition where the pictorial space actually opens up. It hosts a landscape where the landscape has a certain depth in which you can be and dwell inside the paintings. And then on the other hand, there's those that actually push all the energy to the fore. And I can just think through that, through this sort of Goncharova riff that I tried, where the backdrop is all about carrying the energy forward into a space where in the previous session then everyone has performed readings or relations. And I know that transition became stronger when Silke, when you were in New York, in LA, that is also, I think, part of would get us into an entire debate around the cinematic. No, is the cinematic an image that invites desire and houses it, or is the cinematic image, the silver screen, something that actually pushes electricity outwards into the space? No, that you sit before the screen that then radiates a certain energy outwards. And with the confrontational quality, yeah, it's the whole question of the pose, no? It's like, meet me.
But it feels like those last paintings ask the question, meet me a little bit closer.
Yeah. But also meet me in what key, so what you were saying about, is it a key of certainty, like Francis Stark's raccoon, yeah? I'm here, are you here too? Or is it actually a key of a certain uncertainty where the kind of the leader has been plugged out? Silke and I once did a workshop together at the Roski School in California about poses that assemble community, and that's when Silke also invited Flora Wiegman to teach us Trio A. And that was such a wild experience, because speaking of the loss of the leader, what you realize, especially if you can't have no training in choreography, the first response that you have is you always look for some person and then you imitate them. What is so devilish about Trio A is that the poses constantly turn on an axis. You can never actually look for guidance for one dancer, because the moment you turn, that person's going to be behind you. So there is something in the experience of dancing Trio A that you realize Yvonne Rainer is actually plugging exactly that leader out of the group, because there is no way that one of the dancers can lead the others, because the turns are... and there was a second thing that Flora was also saying, like, as a classically trained dancer, you never just learn poses, you always also learn transitions. I can't check that, I haven't studied that. And she was saying that the brutal thing about Trio A is that it's kind of agrammatical, that each pose that you go into is its own thing, and you have to remember not just the poses but the transitions as well. So it's a double decentering that maybe is also creating that space of a particular uncentered energy that then creates a very particular social space of that is energized but not necessarily centralized. That's the lesson of Trio A, maybe, where it addresses, it's always rhetorical, it always materially talks to people, but it's not necessarily around one focused gravity center or something like that.
Are there any questions?
actually want to see your face, which you can also decide to do, or you can hang in the Morena experience. You can actually energize the work from the floor up. And in the Rite of Spring, I think we were reading what I probably supposed to talk to that. The whole idea of the Rite of Spring is that there's something on the ground. There's a provocation against the idea of levitating up into representation, which make contact and get the energy from that bounce. Yeah, low hanging, very good, very important.
Sabit?
Thank you, Jan, for your really very thought-provoking narration and genealogy of the moon as a motive sign, pre-sign, and its different functions. I was thinking when you were pointing at the Manet painting, yeah, because I remembered a reading by Carol Armstrong of this painting where she says that Manet makes a joke of equalizing the painting and the commodities. You didn't show the part of the bar where all the bottles are positioned and where Manet writes his signature in, to the labels, yeah. And and she argues that these spots are exactly reflecting the opacity of the painting, and that it then rejects the commodity status, which he at the same time evokes by the way of painting. And I was asking them myself in how far this could also be something interesting for the reading of Silke's painting. We didn't speak about the commodity status, painting as commodity. Yeah. Do you see there, if there's any possible connection?
I mean, I was driving it very hard into the other direction, starting with Douglas Crimp, pushing against Crimp. Jutta, I think you once, after a talk that I gave in a similar vein, were saying, Jan, you shouldn't forget that the commodity talks. And whenever I realize I'm pushing it hard towards the, let's say, the existential, mimetic, material joy and pain of painting, I want to get the out of the space where representation traps desire in shiny objects. Still in my head, this arguing with you is like, does it talk? Really, I get it. Yeah, no, like pop is so much about rendering, using that eloquence of the fetishistic thing.
But I think you yourself brought up some, actually, I found this very interesting links to the songs about the moon.
Yeah.
Because they had exactly the same problem. There were absolutely commodities.
Yeah.
I mean, there were hits, there were all like things that were not for no reason, for some reason they were handed over, not just because they were beautiful or whatever. They were
Are there any closing remarks from the audience? Questions? Then I would like to take this opportunity and thank everyone who participated today, speakers, performers, but also the audience who was here throughout and so active. Thanks to all of the funders who made this possible. And I think the Kunstverein will be open for another half hour. Have a look at the show. The light now is beginning to change outside. You might catch a little bit more of that atmosphere that the orange or yellow light produces. Tomorrow is the last day of the show, so another chance to see it also. And maybe also have a look downstairs. Thank you to everyone for making this such a special day.
Thank you for having us and thank you for hosting.